So the next part of your negative that we need to deal with is when you have to answer a question. Now, please note that they can give you a question and ask you to just rewrite the question, but they can also ask you to answer. So it's important that you look out for this word, beantwoord, or just antwoord as well, because that will give you an indication that you're answering. If they don't ask you to beantwoord or antwoord the question, you have to rewrite the question and it needs to stay a question. So please make sure that you look out for these words, beantwoord or antwoord, in order for you to answer the question correctly. So when you get a question that you need to answer, the very first thing that I need you to do is to go and identify your subject, your verb, your time, your object, manner, the whole part of stompie. It's the easiest way for you to do this correctly. And then when you start with your answer, you need to always remember that you're going to start with near. There is no other way to start a sentence when you beantwoord a question in negative. Now remember that when you do your answer part, that all your negative rules still apply. What's meant with that is you're still going to have your knee after verb 1 and your knee at the end of the sentence. Should you have just a subject and a verb, you only have one knee. Should there be a pronoun, the knee goes after the pronoun instead of after the verb. So all those general rules that we went through in the previous negative slideshow will still apply here. So it's important that you remember that. Now, once you've identified every part of your question, and remember your question will always start with your verb, you are going to start with near to answer the sentence, after which you will rewrite the sentence into the correct order. Remember, your changing words will still change. You are still only allowed 2 negatives per sentence. So it's important that you keep all of that in mind. So I want to do a few examples with you just so that you get an idea of what's expected. Like I said, the first thing that you want to do when you get your questions is you want to label everything and make sure that you label it correctly, knowing that the first word in your sentence will always be a verb. Remember, a question can't start with anything but a verb or a question word like wie, wat, waar, wanneer. When we ask you to answer a question in negative, you will never get a question word. You will only get a verb to start the sentence. So it's important that you understand that the stompie order still applies, but for a question, meaning you're always going to start with verb 1, then subject, time, object. If they had manner, place, verb 2, infinitive, it'll be in that order. In this case, I have a preposition at the end of the sentence. Pay attention to your punctuation, so when to use your question mark and when not to use your question mark. If you rewrite the sentence beautifully and you add that question mark back into your sentence, the entire sentence is wrong. So you need to pay attention to small details like that. So once you've labeled everything in your sentence, you're always going to start with near. Near because they're asking you to answer in negative. Now, a few things that you need to take note of. This near that you're starting your sentence with, this near is not one of your negatives. When we talk about the sentence that needs 2 negatives, we're talking about this part over here. It's the actual stompie sentence. So within the sentence, I require 2 negatives. This part is not part of my sentence. When we're talking about the sentence, it's this sentence over here, or it's this sentence over here, or this one over here. And nowhere in these original sentences do I have a near. So that near is an add-on. Within your sentence, I still require 2 negatives. If it's going to be easier for you to get into the habit of just doing this correctly, then maybe do it as a 2-step answer. So I'm going to rewrite the sentence into stompie now. So I start with near, then my subject, jy, then my verb 1, gaan. So I've written down jy, I've written down gaan, then vandag, then dorp, then toe. Now that you've written it in the right order, now you can start making the changes. And a few changes that I need to look out for or pay attention to is the following. First of all, within this sentence over here, I require 2 negatives. So there's no changing word. So the first knee will go after gaan and the second knee at the end of the sentence. I also need to please make sure that you remember this. Pay attention to my pronouns because my pronoun is going to change when I answer. So once you've written it in the right order, you can go and take note of all your changes and then you can rewrite into your answer, your correct answer with all the necessary changes. Nee, ek gaan nie vandag dorp toe nie. I have my 2 negatives and I have my pronoun that's changed. Let's go on to the second one. Second one says, is daar iets waarmee ek jou kan help? This is actually a 2-part sentence. The most important thing for you to know is that verb 1 is at the beginning, and then I have my subject right after. This is your object. Obviously, this is a conjunction, and then I have subject, object, verb 1, and verb 2 again. So I don't need to worry about the rest of the sentence. I don't even have to worry about that conjunction over there. In this sentence, I need 2 negatives. So I start with my neer, and just to do it step by step, I'm going to do number 2 the same way that I did number 1. We're going to rewrite the sentence. So, nee, daar, so I start with my subject, is iets waarmee ek jou kan help. Don't put the question mark. Now that I've written it down in the right order, now I can make my changes. The following changes need to happen. I need to have 2 negatives in my sentence. Remember, iets is a changing word. So it is going to change to niks, and I need a nie at the end of the sentence. Nee, daar is niks waarmee ek jou kan help nie. Remember, your ek and your jou needs to change as well. So, I rewrite my sentence with all the changes. I have my negative changes and I have my pronoun changes. So, nee, daar is niks waarmee jy my kan help nie. Remember, only 2 negatives. I have niks and I have nie, and I've changed both my pronouns. No more than these 2 negatives. Alright, for number 3. Speel jy graag op jou iPad? Speel is verb 1. Jy is my subject. Graag is manne. Op jou iPad is my place. So, I rewrite my sentence. I'm just going to change everything. If you don't understand why I changed it the way that I did, please, you must just let me know. So, nee, then my subject, ek. Obviously, jy changes to ek. Ek speel nie graag op object, pronoun changes op my iPad en dan nie. So, I've changed my pronouns and I have 2 negatives in my sentence. Then the last one, kan iemand nog vinnig hardloop? Now, the reason I want you to pay attention to the following is, I have 2 changing words. And this is why I want you to always get into the habit of always in your mind going through this first step first. So in this case, I'm quickly going to rewrite it or the first step first, just for you to take note of why this is going to change. So in the first sentence, I'm just going to rewrite nee. I start with my subject, iemand kan nog vinnig hardloop. Now, I've just rewritten it. Remember that I have two changing words. Iemand can change to niemand and nog can change to nie meer. I'm only allowed to change one of them because I'm only allowed two negatives in a sentence. If I were to change iemand to niemand, nog to nie meer, and have my nie at the end of the sentence, I'll have three negatives, which I'm not allowed. So rewrite the sentence first so that you can see which one appears first, because the changing word that appears first is going to change. So iemand is going to change to niemand. So nee, niemand kan nog change, nog stays exactly the same now. Kan nog vinnig hardloop nie. Now I have my first and my second negative. I only have two negatives. I'm not allowed more than two negatives. So please make sure that you don't change more than one changing word. The changing word that appears first in your answer, and that goes for our normal negative sentences as well. The first one that appears changes, and only that negative and the nie at the end of the sentence is allowed. So the third aspect of negative is when we do demands or instructions. So when we do a request or an instruction. So bevele is demands, a versoek is a request, and an instruction, instructie is an instruction. So the only difference between these two, because they're going to appear exactly the same, the only difference between these two is this word over here, asseblief. You'll have exactly the same type of sentence. The only difference is the word asseblief. So these are the examples that I'm going to do with you. So I just want you to take note. I used exactly the same sentences. The only difference is in these sentences I used asseblief, whereas in these I didn't. So the sentences will appear exactly the same. The only difference is the word asseblief will appear in the request and a demand will be without the asseblief. So the first thing that we're going to do is your versoek, and that's a request. So your versoek is always the one with the asseblief in the sentence. This will be an indication that you're dealing with a versoek, a request that has an asseblief. One very important thing to remember for both of these, the only way for you to recognize a demand, whether it's a request or an instruction, is the fact that the sentence will always start with a doing verb. I call them doing verbs. In Afrikaans, the actual right word for it is a hoofwerkwoord. So it's something that I can actually do. I can do all of these three things. So you need to look out for a doing verb. Don't always rely on the exclamation mark at the end of the sentence, because there won't always be an exclamation mark, especially with your requests. There's not always going to be an exclamation mark. So make sure that you pay attention to this very first word to be able to identify whether it's a demand or not. So when I look at my first one, a request, the word asseblief will always appear in it. And when I have a request that I need to rewrite into negative, your negative rules are completely different. First of all, you will always need two negatives, the same as any normal negative sentence. However, you have very specific negatives that you have to use. When you rewrite the sentence, you have to rewrite the sentence versoek with moet asseblief nie. The same sentence must end with nie at the end of the sentence. So it's important that you understand that there is no other way for you to rewrite these sentences other than this way. For a versoek, you have to start with moet asseblief nie. And you have to end with nie. You always have to move your verb to the end as well. And then to make sure that you have both negatives, you are not allowed to change anything in that sentence. This part over here and this part over here, these are your negatives that are set. We're already giving you that as your first negative. Moet asseblief nie, that entire thing is your first negative. And the nie at the end of the sentence is your second negative. These two negatives are set. You are only allowed 2 negatives per sentence. That means if in my sentence I happen to have a word that can change, none of those words are allowed to change because I already have 2 negatives in my sentence. I'm not allowed more than 2 negatives per sentence. If I happen to have an instruction, I need to understand that the instruction has no asseblief in it, so geen asseblief. There's no asseblief in it, and I also have a very specific way in which I need to start it. I have to start with moenie, and I have to end with nie. Moenie will be my first verb, and nie will be my negative, and nie will be my second negative. I'm not allowed to change anything in the middle of the sentence. Once I've changed something in the middle of the sentence, I will end up with 3 negatives, which I'm not allowed to have. I have to only have 2 negatives, and they've already given me my 2 negatives. These are set negatives for answering an instruction. So you are not allowed to choose on how you start either a request or an instruction. We give you the way in which we want you to start it and to end it. The thing that you need to remember is that they count as my 1 and my 2 negatives here and my 1 and 2 negatives there. And that my verb always moves to the end. But this is only for the demands. So, let's have a look at some examples. Just going to move that over there. All right, so in the first sentence, number 1 over here, it says, maak jou bed op. I know it's a demand because it starts with my verb. I also know it's a demand because of the exclamation mark, even though the exclamation mark isn't always a given. In the second sentence, once again, I start with my verb. In the third sentence, I only have a verb. So these are clear indications that it's a demand. I know it's an instruction and that I need to start with moenie because there's no asseblief in any one of these sentences. Because in all these sentences I don't have an asseblief, all these sentences have to start with moenie. So moenie is my first negative that I need to start with, moenie. I need to move my verb 1 to the end of my sentence. Once I move it to the end of the sentence, I need to remember that if there's a preposition at the end of the sentence, that preposition plus my verb is going to become one word. So I have to have my moenie in the beginning of the sentence. I have to have my verb at the end of the sentence and a nie. So I start with moenie, jou, bed, opmaak, one word, nie. Then double check. Do you have your 2 negatives? I do. And do you have your verb at the end of the sentence? Fantastic. If they've given you exclamation mark, you add an exclamation mark. If they don't give you an exclamation mark, you don't add it. Then for number 2, eet jou kos. Remember, we're not answering questions, so no need for you to go and change the pronouns now. I take verb 1. I move verb 1 to the end of the sentence. I start with moenie. Moenie is my first negative. Moenie. Then the rest of my sentence, jou kos. Eet goes to the end. I add my negative. This one has an exclamation, so I add an exclamation. Double check. Do I have only 2 negatives? Yes, I do. And my verb is at the end of the sentence, so I'm fine. For number 3, this seems very confusing, but actually very easy. There's just one word, and the word is your verb. I still start with moenie. I still require 2 negatives, moenie. The verb goes to the end. There's only a verb, so I write down the verb, slaap. And then my last negative, nie, exclamation mark. So I have my verb and I have my 2 negatives. When you have a request, the same principle applies. I already have my very strict instruction on how I need to start and end my sentence. My verb is always going to go to the end as well. And if they give me an exclamation mark, I'm going to keep the exclamation mark. Now, in the first sentence, once again, all my sentences start with my verb. All right? Each one of them have an asseblief in them. And because of the asseblief that I find in my sentence, I'm going to use asseblief as well. So, I start with moet, asseblief. You have to write out asseblief. I just don't have space now. But you have to write it out in an answer. Moet asseblief nie. My verb goes to the end of the sentence. Remember, preposition plus a verb becomes one word. So, moet asseblief nie jou bed opmaak, one word, nie. Remember, because I already add the asseblief here, I'm not going to add the asseblief that's in the sentence as well. I can't have 2 asseblief. There's only one asseblief, and the asseblief is already covered in the way that we're answering the request. So, I check. Do I have my 2 negatives? Yes, I do. Is my verb at the end of the sentence? Yes, it is. In the next sentence, eet asseblief jou kos. Moet asseblief nie. It goes to the end of my sentence. Moet asseblief nie jou kos eet nie. Exclamation mark. I forgot the exclamation mark there. So, double check. I have my niece, my 2 negatives. Remember, the moet asseblief nie counts as your 1 negative. So, I have my 1 negative, I have my second negative, and I have my verb at the end of the sentence. And then the same with the last one. Moet asseblief nie. My verb goes to the end of the sentence. No need for me to write the asseblief. I already have it in here. Slaap nie. So, I have my 2 negatives and I have my verb, so I'm okay. Then the fourth and final aspect is when I have a question and you don't have to answer it. And that's quite important. So you need to remember that there's times that we're going to ask you to rewrite, and maybe these are 2 words that you can just pay attention to. Herskryf of skryf. So this will be in your instruction. Herskryf of skryf die sin in negatief of die vraag in negatief. Then it needs to stay a question. I only answer a question when it says beantwoord. When it says herskryf of skryf die vraag in negatief, you are only rewriting the sentence, the question, so that it stays a question. That's very important. So you have to pay special attention to your instructions. So when you have a question and you don't have to answer it, then the nie moves to after the object. So remember, each one of my questions will start with a verb. So these are givens. We know that my questions and demands always start with verbs. So each one of these sentences have a verb. Now, the very next thing that you need to write down, Sorry, please just make a change. It should say subject, not object. So you're going to make sure that you label everything. Die onderwyseres, die dief, en jy. All right. Now, in each one of these sentences, you need to please make sure that you label at least your verb and your subject. So I've identified the verb and the subject in each one of these. Once I've identified the verb and the subject, you are going to add your nie after the subject. So not after the verb, because this is a change of word order because it's a question. And when the word order changes, I need to change my rules as well. So in order to keep it a question, the nie now goes after the subject and at the end of the sentence. And it stays a question. So my answer is going to be, kan kinders nie stadig loop nie? Vraagteken. As jy die vraagteken vergeet, is dit verkeerd. Remember, you still need to look out for those changing words, so double check your sentences if there's changing words. Eet die onderwysers graag sjokolade. I made a mistake there. Should be there. Eet die onderwysers graag sjokolade. I rewrite my question into another question, but a negative one. So eet die onderwysers. Remember, the nie now goes after the subject. Nie graag sjokolade nie. And it stays a question. Nummer 3, steel die dief die kar. A dief is a thief. Steal is to steal. So, steel die dief. The nie now goes after the subject. Nie, kar nie. Vraagteken, moenie die vraagteken vergeet nie. And then the last one says, sal jy iets vir my doen? Pay attention to our beautiful little changing word, and remember your changing words take preference. So you're going to keep the sentence exactly the same. Sal jy. Now instead of the nie that goes after the subject, I'm rather going to change the iets to niks. Vir my doen nie. I have my 2 negatives. Remember, you're rewriting a question, you're not answering. The pronouns don't change. Remember your question marks in each one of your sentences once you've answered them, otherwise it is wrong. All right. Should you have any questions or queries regarding any negative sentences, you need to let me know by Tuesday, let's say 6 o'clock, so that you have the weekend, today, Monday and Tuesday, 6 o'clock in the evening, to go through all your negative work. Until then, I will not be giving you any additional work. Enjoy!